The separation begins long before anyone recognizes it. It starts quietly, often hidden beneath ordinary events, ordinary disappointments, and ordinary departures. Throughout the biblical record, a recurring pattern emerges across centuries, deserts, mountains, kingdoms, and empires. Those who would eventually carry significant responsibilities were rarely prepared in crowded places. Instead, their journeys consistently moved through seasons of distance. Geography itself seems to reveal this pattern. Abraham left the familiar environment of Ur and crossed vast territories toward an unknown destination. Moses spent decades far from Egypt in the wilderness of Midian before standing before Pharaoh. Joseph was removed from his family and carried into a foreign land long before he stood in authority. David moved from shepherd fields to caves before ascending to the throne. Elijah disappeared into remote regions before confronting kings. John the Baptist emerged from the wilderness before preparing the way. Even the ministry of Jesus repeatedly moved through isolated mountains, deserts, and solitary places. Across generations, the pattern remained remarkably consistent. Separation was not an interruption of the mission. Separation was part of the mission itself. Looking at these journeys as historical movements across real landscapes reveals something important. The chosen were rarely allowed to remain where they felt most comfortable. Their stories unfolded through departures. Familiar roads ended. Relationships changed. Communities shifted. Seasons closed. New territories appeared on the horizon. What seemed like loss often became preparation. What appeared to be abandonment often became positioning. The map of Scripture is filled with these movements, from Mesopotamia to Canaan, from Egypt to Midian, from Bethlehem to the wilderness of Judah, from Galilee to isolated mountains. The chosen repeatedly experienced physical and emotional distance before stepping into their purpose. This pattern was not accidental. Crowds often reinforce existing identities. Isolation exposes them. Familiar voices can maintain old habits. Silence reveals what remains when every external support is removed. Before a person can carry a greater assignment, the foundations beneath that person must be examined. Throughout biblical history, separation functioned like a refining process. It stripped away dependence on approval. It challenged comfort. It exposed fears that remained hidden beneath routine. In the beginning, separation feels confusing because it rarely arrives with explanation. People leave. Opportunities disappear. Doors close. The future becomes unclear. Yet when the timeline is viewed from a broader perspective, the pattern becomes easier to recognize. Abraham could not become Abraham while remaining where he had always been. Moses could not become Moses inside Pharaoh's palace. David could not become David while staying permanently among the sheep. Joseph could not become Joseph while remaining only a favored son. Their future identities required environments different from their current realities. The movement itself became part of the transformation. Every mile traveled, every season endured, and every lonely moment contributed to the preparation that would later become visible to everyone else. One of the most striking aspects of biblical separation is that it often occurred before any public significance appeared. The chosen were isolated before they were elevated. History remembers the throne, but often forgets the cave. History remembers the palace, but often forgets the prison. History remembers the miracles, but often forgets the wilderness. Yet the wilderness frequently occupied far more time than the public victory that followed. Moses spent 40 years in Midian. David endured years of pursuit. Joseph remained imprisoned long before promotion arrived. These timelines reveal that separation was not a brief pause. It was often a major chapter of the story. During these periods, identity was forged away from applause. Character was developed beyond public recognition. Conviction was strengthened where no audience existed. The chosen learned to continue moving forward when external validation disappeared. Geography reinforces this lesson repeatedly. Deserts dominate many biblical narratives. Mountains appear again and again. Wilderness regions become recurring settings. These locations were not random backdrops. They created conditions impossible to reproduce elsewhere. The desert removes distractions. The mountain changes perspective. The wilderness reduces dependence upon familiar structures. In such places, individuals encounter realities they cannot avoid. Hidden weaknesses emerge. Unresolved fears surface. priorities become clearer. Separation creates space where transformation can occur without interference from constant noise. This helps explain why the chosen are often separated from everyone else. The process requires environments where deep changes can happen. Crowded settings frequently reward appearances. Isolated settings reveal substance. Public spaces often encourage performance. Private seasons demand authenticity. The chosen are not separated because they are superior. They are separated because preparation requires conditions that many people would actively avoid. Scripture repeatedly shows that separation is not primarily about punishment. It is about development. Consider Joseph, betrayed by brothers, sold into slavery, transported into Egypt, falsely accused and imprisoned. Each stage increased the distance between Joseph and the life he once knew. Looking only at individual events, the story appears tragic. Looking at the entire timeline, a larger movement becomes visible. Every separation positioned him closer to the role he would eventually occupy. The pit led toward Egypt. Egypt led toward prison. Prison led toward the palace. None of those transitions felt logical while they were happening, yet each one contributed to the final outcome. The chosen frequently experience separation because their future assignment exists beyond the boundaries of their current environment. Remaining where they are would prevent them from becoming who they must become. David presents another powerful example. Before becoming king, he spent years hidden among hills, caves, and wilderness strongholds. During those years, he lost certainty, stability, and security. Yet he gained something more valuable. Leadership developed in obscurity. Courage matured through adversity. Dependence deepened through difficulty. When the throne finally arrived, it rested upon foundations built during isolation. The public victory was supported by private preparation. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout Scripture. Public moments are often brief. Private preparation is often extensive. The chosen are separated because lasting influence requires deep roots. Shallow foundations cannot support significant responsibilities. Another important dimension of separation involves perspective. Distance changes vision. When people remain inside the same environment indefinitely, certain assumptions become invisible because they are constantly reinforced. Separation interrupts those assumptions. The chosen are frequently moved beyond familiar boundaries so they can see reality differently. Abraham viewed the stars from unfamiliar territory. Moses encountered revelation far from Egypt. Elijah heard the still small voice away from public conflict. Jesus regularly withdrew from crowds before returning to ministry. Separation creates perspective. It allows individuals to see what constant activity often conceals. In biblical history, major turning points frequently emerged from places of solitude. Decisions were clarified, direction was established, purpose became clearer. The silence that initially appeared empty eventually became meaningful. Many people assume separation means rejection. Biblical narratives repeatedly suggest something different. Separation often functions as preparation for greater responsibility. The process feels painful because it involves letting go of previous identities, relationships, expectations, and securities. Yet without that release, future growth remains limited. The chosen are not separated because they are forgotten. They are separated because transformation requires space. A seed must enter darkness before growth begins. A river often travels through remote terrain before reaching larger destinations. Likewise, many biblical figures experienced seasons where progress seemed invisible, yet beneath the surface, important developments were occurring. Faith matured, wisdom increased, character strengthened, conviction deepened. By the time public opportunities appeared, the internal work had already been completed. The historical record of Scripture reveals a consistent truth. Separation is rarely the end of the story. It is often the beginning of a new chapter. The distance that initially feels confusing eventually reveals purpose. The wilderness eventually connects to the promised land. The prison eventually connects to authority. The cave eventually connects to kingship. The desert eventually connects to mission. Looking across centuries of biblical history, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. God repeatedly separates individuals before entrusting them with significant responsibilities. not because isolation itself is the goal, but because transformation requires conditions that separation uniquely provides. Through deserts, mountains, wilderness paths, foreign lands, hidden seasons, and long periods of obscurity, the chosen are shaped into people capable of carrying assignments larger than themselves. Their journeys move across maps and timelines, across kingdoms and generations, revealing a recurring historical pattern that continues to stand out from Genesis to Revelation. The separation may appear like loss when viewed from the middle of the journey, but from the perspective of the completed story, it often becomes clear that the distance was never meaningless. It was preparation unfolding across time, terrain, and history, shaping individuals for destinations they could not yet see. The journey continues through a recurring sequence that appears across the biblical timeline with remarkable consistency. First comes the calling, often quiet and barely understood. Then comes the separation, frequently painful and unexpected. After that comes a prolonged season of preparation, hidden from public view. Only then does the larger assignment emerge. This pattern stretches across centuries, linking people who lived in different eras, spoke different languages, and walked through different lands. Yet their stories reveal the same progression. Separation consistently stood between potential and fulfillment. It became the bridge connecting what they were to what they would become. When examined geographically, the scale of this pattern becomes even more striking. The biblical world covered deserts, rivers, mountain ranges, trade routes, fertile valleys, wilderness regions, and distant kingdoms. Movement across these locations often reflected an internal transformation occurring simultaneously. Physical distance mirrored personal development. Every major relocation carried significance. Abraham crossed territories that would eventually shape the future of an entire nation. Moses moved from the power structures of Egypt into the isolation of Midian. Joseph traveled unwillingly into Egypt, unaware that his journey would influence generations. Ruth left Moab and entered Bethlehem. Daniel was carried into Babylon. Paul traveled across the Mediterranean world. The chosen rarely remained stationary. Their stories unfolded through movement. Their development unfolded through separation. Their preparation unfolded through distance. One reason separation appears so frequently is that familiarity can become a powerful limitation. Human beings naturally adapt to their surroundings. Expectations become normal. Behaviors become predictable. Relationships reinforce existing identities. Over time, growth slows because everything operates according to established patterns. Separation interrupts those patterns. It removes the environment that once defined a person. Suddenly, old assumptions lose their influence. New possibilities emerge. The chosen often experience this disruption because their future responsibilities require capacities that cannot develop within their current circumstances. Remaining in the same environment might feel safer, but safety rarely produces transformation. Throughout Scripture, growth consistently emerges from movement. New territory introduces new challenges. New challenges reveal new strengths. New strengths prepare individuals for future responsibilities. Consider the life of Moses. His story spans multiple landscapes, each representing a distinct phase of development. Egypt provided education, privilege, and access to power. Midian provided obscurity, patience, and humility. The wilderness journey provided leadership experience and dependence upon divine guidance. Each environment contributed something unique. None could be skipped. Had Moses remained permanently in Egypt, certain qualities would never have developed. Had he remained permanently in Midian, his larger purpose would never have emerged. Separation functioned as a transition between stages of preparation. The movement itself became essential. Similar patterns appear elsewhere. David's isolation among sheep prepared him differently than life inside a royal court could have done. Joseph's imprisonment developed qualities that prosperity alone would never have produced. Elijah's wilderness experiences strengthened convictions that later sustained him during public confrontations. In each case, separation created conditions where growth could occur beyond the influence of comfort and routine. Another reason the chosen are separated involves focus. History repeatedly demonstrates that significant missions require concentrated attention. Constant distractions dilute clarity. Endless noise weakens discernment. Continuous social pressure can obscure priorities. Separation removes competing influences. It creates space where essential matters become visible. Many biblical turning points occurred after periods of withdrawal. Moses encountered revelation on a mountain. Elijah received direction in isolation. John the Baptist emerged from the wilderness with a clear mission. Jesus spent extended periods alone before major moments of ministry. These examples reveal that separation often serves a practical purpose. It eliminates competing voices so that direction can become unmistakable. Without separation, clarity might never emerge. The chosen frequently discover that what initially felt like emptiness eventually becomes focus. The silence that once seemed uncomfortable becomes valuable. The distance that once felt painful becomes productive. Over time, separation reveals its purpose. It creates an environment where preparation can proceed without constant interruption. Biblical history also reveals another important principle. Separation frequently exposes dependency. People often discover what they rely upon only after it is removed. Comfort, reputation, relationships, achievements, and familiar routines can quietly become sources of security. When separation occurs, those supports may disappear. What remains becomes visible. This process is rarely comfortable, yet it consistently appears throughout Scripture. Abraham left behind certainty. Moses left behind status. David lost stability. Joseph lost freedom. Daniel lost his homeland. Each experienced significant disruption. Each confronted uncertainty. Yet through that uncertainty, deeper foundations emerged. Their confidence shifted away from temporary circumstances and towards something more enduring. Separation stripped away illusions of control. It revealed what truly sustained them. This helps explain why separation often feels intense. It touches the deepest layers of identity. It forces individuals to confront realities they might otherwise avoid. Yet the outcome frequently produces greater strength, resilience, and clarity. Looking across biblical chronology, another pattern becomes evident. Separation often precedes expansion. Before influence increases, preparation deepens. Before visibility increases, character strengthens. Before responsibility increases, capacity grows. The chosen are frequently hidden before they are revealed. This sequence appears repeatedly because larger assignments require stronger foundations. A structure intended to reach great heights requires deep support beneath the surface. Likewise, individuals entrusted with significant responsibilities require extensive preparation. Separation provides the environment where that preparation can occur. It slows the pace. It reduces distractions. It creates opportunities for reflection, growth, and transformation. What appears from the outside as inactivity may actually be intensive preparation. The hidden years often matter as much as the visible years. Sometimes they matter more. The life of Joseph illustrates this principle with extraordinary clarity. Years passed between the dreams of his youth and the fulfillment of those dreams. During that interval, separation shaped every aspect of his character. Betrayal taught endurance. Slavery taught responsibility. Imprisonment taught perseverance. By the time authority arrived, Joseph possessed qualities impossible to develop through comfort alone. The years of separation were not wasted years. They were foundational years. Similar observations can be made regarding David. The throne eventually became visible to everyone. The caves were known only to a few, yet the caves played a crucial role in producing the leader who would later govern a nation. Separation often conceals its purpose until much later. People living through it rarely possess a complete understanding of what is happening. The broader significance becomes visible only when the timeline is viewed as a whole. Another fascinating aspect of biblical separation involves timing. The chosen are rarely separated for arbitrary reasons. Their journeys unfold according to larger historical developments. Joseph's rise corresponded with coming famine. Moses emerged when liberation approached. Esther occupied her position during a critical moment in history. Daniel served during major transitions among empires. The preparation of individuals frequently aligned with larger events unfolding around them. Separation ensured they would be ready when their moment arrived. Without preparation, opportunity would have exceeded capacity. Without isolation, development would have remained incomplete. The chosen were separated because history was moving toward moments that required prepared individuals. Their hidden seasons were connected to future responsibilities they could not yet fully understand. This perspective changes how separation is viewed. Instead of appearing random, it becomes purposeful. Instead of appearing empty, it becomes strategic. Instead of appearing like abandonment, it becomes preparation occurring beyond immediate visibility. The biblical narrative repeatedly reinforces this understanding. Again and again, individuals moved through periods where little seemed to happen externally, while profound changes occurred internally. The separation itself became a workshop of transformation. Character developed, perspective expanded, wisdom increased, strength matured. By the time public assignments emerged, the essential work had already been accomplished beneath the surface. Looking across the centuries, from patriarchs to prophets, from kings to apostles, the pattern remains consistent. God separates the chosen not to diminish them, but to prepare them, not to isolate them permanently, but to strengthen them for future responsibilities, not to remove purpose, but to develop capacity. The deserts, mountains, wilderness paths, foreign lands, and hidden seasons that fill the biblical record all point toward the same reality. Significant preparation often occurs away from public attention. The chosen are separated because their future requires qualities that can only emerge through that process. History reveals this pattern repeatedly. Geography illustrates it vividly. Chronology confirms it consistently. The separation may feel difficult while it unfolds, but when viewed from the perspective of the completed journey, it becomes clear that many of the most important developments occurred precisely during those hidden years when everything seemed quiet, uncertain, and far removed from the final destination. The final stage of the pattern emerges when the purpose of the separation becomes visible. For much of the journey, the chosen often stand in environments that seem disconnected from their future. The distance feels excessive, the waiting feels prolonged, the isolation feels unnecessary. Yet when the entire historical sequence is examined, a remarkable truth appears. Every major figure who experienced significant separation eventually carried something back into the world that could not have been developed without it. The wilderness did not merely remove them from others. It transformed them into people capable of serving others. The isolation did not simply create distance, it created depth. The separation was never intended to be the destination. It was preparation for what came next. This principle can be traced throughout biblical history. Abraham emerged from his journey carrying a covenant that would influence generations. Moses returned from Midian carrying leadership forged through decades of obscurity. David emerged from caves with the experience and resilience necessary to govern a kingdom. Joseph emerged from prison with wisdom capable of preserving nations during crisis. Daniel emerged from exile with unwavering conviction that influenced empires. The pattern remains consistent. Separation produced qualities that later became essential. Without the hidden years, the public years would have lacked the necessary foundation. Looking at these stories geographically reveals how often purpose emerged from places considered insignificant by the standards of the world. Great developments frequently originated in deserts rather than capitals, in wilderness regions rather than centers of power, in hidden locations rather than celebrated institutions. This reversal appears repeatedly throughout Scripture. Human beings often look toward visibility, influence, and recognition when evaluating significance. The biblical narrative repeatedly points elsewhere. It directs attention toward preparation, character, endurance, and transformation. The chosen was separated because those qualities required time and space to develop. The journey itself became the training ground. Every difficult mile carried meaning. Every lonely season contributed something necessary. Every period of obscurity strengthened a different aspect of character. What appeared empty was often full of preparation, invisible to observers. One of the greatest misconceptions about separation is the assumption that it means exclusion from purpose. Biblical history suggests the opposite. Separation frequently places individuals on the direct path toward purpose. The process feels contradictory because movement often appears to go backward before it moves forward. Joseph moved farther from home before moving closer to destiny. Moses moved away from power before receiving greater responsibility. David moved away from public recognition before becoming king. Again and again, biblical timelines reveal progress hidden beneath apparent setbacks. Separation creates this illusion because preparation rarely looks dramatic while it is occurring. Growth often happens quietly. Development frequently unfolds without announcement. Transformation usually takes place beneath the surface. Only later do the results become visible. This explains why many of the most important biblical developments occurred outside public attention. The decisive moments often happened before anyone else noticed. The true beginning of leadership started long before leadership became visible. The true beginning of influence started long before influence became measurable. The true beginning of purpose started long before purpose became recognized. Another striking feature of biblical separation is the way it reshapes priorities. Individuals who pass through prolonged periods of isolation frequently emerge with a different understanding of what truly matters. Temporary concerns lose their dominance. Surface-level ambitions lose their appeal. Deeper values become more important. Throughout Scripture, those who experienced separation often developed extraordinary clarity. Moses no longer viewed life through the lens of Egyptian privilege. David no longer measured success through immediate comfort. Daniel no longer based conviction upon cultural approval. Separation stripped away distractions and revealed essentials. The chosen emerged with greater focus because competing influences had been reduced. They learned what could not be learned amid constant noise. They discovered what remained when familiar supports disappeared. They developed stability rooted in something deeper than circumstance. This transformation became one of the greatest outcomes of separation. Not merely preparation for future assignments, but preparation for enduring those assignments faithfully. History demonstrates that visibility creates pressure, leadership creates pressure, influence creates pressure, responsibility creates pressure. Individuals who enter those environments without sufficient preparation often struggle beneath the weight. The chosen were separated because they needed strength before responsibility arrived. The hidden years built endurance. The lonely years developed resilience. The uncertain years cultivated patience. These qualities later sustained them through challenges that would have overwhelmed an unprepared person. Looking across the biblical record, another important observation emerges. Separation often created a distinction between identity and environment. Many people derive their sense of self from their surroundings. They become defined by their position, community, achievements, or circumstances. When those things change, identity becomes unstable. The chosen repeatedly experienced separation because they needed to discover an identity capable of surviving changing environments. Joseph remained Joseph in the pit, in slavery, in prison, and in the palace. Daniel remained Daniel in Jerusalem and in Babylon. David remained David in the field, in the wilderness, and on the throne. Their environments changed dramatically, yet something deeper remained constant. Separation helped establish that stability. It revealed who they were independent of where they were. This lesson became essential because their future assignments required adaptability. They would move through changing circumstances without losing their sense of purpose. They would encounter uncertainty without losing direction. They would experience difficulty without abandoning conviction. The separation prepared them for that reality. Geography continues to reinforce this principle throughout Scripture. Mountains rise and fall across the narrative. Deserts stretch across generations of history. Rivers mark transitions. Wilderness paths connect major events. The physical landscape mirrors the spiritual and historical journey. Movement becomes a recurring theme. The chosen are rarely stationary because preparation often requires travel through different environments. Each location contributes something unique. Each season develops a different capacity. Together they form a complete process. By the end of the journey, The individual has become someone capable of carrying responsibilities that once seemed impossible. This larger perspective reveals why God separates the chosen from everyone else. The purpose is not isolation for its own sake. The purpose is transformation. Separation creates the conditions necessary for growth that cannot occur in ordinary circumstances. It removes distractions. It exposes weaknesses. It strengthens character. It clarifies priorities. It deepens resilience. It expands perspective. Most importantly, it prepares individuals for assignments larger than their current understanding. The biblical timeline repeatedly confirms this pattern. From Genesis to Revelation, the chosen pass through seasons of distance before entering seasons of influence. They experience obscurity before visibility. They endure preparation before responsibility. They walk through wilderness before fulfillment. The sequence remains remarkably consistent across centuries. When viewed from the middle of the process, separation often appears confusing. When viewed from the end of the story, its purpose becomes unmistakable. The hidden years were not interruptions. They were construction periods. The lonely seasons were not evidence of abandonment. They were stages of preparation. The distance was not meaningless. It was strategic. Looking across the vast historical landscape of Scripture, from the journeys of the patriarchs to the movements of the apostles, one truth emerges repeatedly. God often separates the chosen because their future requires more than talent, opportunity, or ambition. It requires transformation. That transformation is frequently developed away from crowds, away from recognition, and away from the familiar. Through deserts, mountains, foreign lands, caves, prisons, wilderness paths, and hidden seasons, individuals are shaped into people capable of carrying responsibilities that extend far beyond themselves. The separation is not the story's conclusion. It is the pathway leading toward it. The chosen are separated not because they are being forgotten, but because they are being prepared. Across biblical history, that pattern appears again and again, unfolding through geography, chronology, movement, and time, revealing a consistent historical reality that remains one of the defining characteristics of the journeys of those set apart for a greater purpose.